Gasp. I didn't lie to y'all this time. On this day, December 18th, 2021, I finished Enchanter's Endgame. I said that it may fly by, and I was right. It flew by. I mean, it flew by. I started this morning at 40%, I think, because I stayed up till 2 a.m. listening to it last night. Oopsie. And then I've just been on and off listening to it all day. I have been, like, stopping it and then playing it and stopping it and playing it, because I'll be, like, really into whatever else I'm doing. But I finished Enchanter's Endgame. I've officially finished The Belgariad by David Eddings. And because it's now a tradition at this point, I just have to say, if you read this series, I might do a separate video on the series, but if you do read this series, do the audiobook version, because Cameron Byerly is the... Byerly. I always say it wrong. Byerly. He's such a freaking good audiobook narrator, and it has to be said. Albeit, he makes some of the scenes weird because it's spoken out loud, but, you know, it's fine. The only reason I say that is because the end scene. The end scene was cringy, let's be honest, but yeah, I finished it like 5 minutes ago, for the record, so it's very on the top of the mind right now. I have not taken notes on what to talk about, but I've taken notes on literally everything that happened in the whole book. I know everything that happened in the whole book. So, the first thing, if we're going in the non-spoiler section, just jumping right on in there. Non-spoilers, the first thing I have to note is that the beginning of this book was not slow. It picked up and it went. So, unlike the last book, this book had me hooked from the beginning, and we were just going. Speeding. We just start with, like, the back to a journey, kind of like most of the series has been, and just going. We're just going. It was a little weird at first, but it started to work out, and there were all these conflicts, and there was all these weird parts, but also I just love my characters. I love Mr. Wolf. I love Silk. Silk has really grown on me over the series. At first, in book 1, I think we met him, and I didn't like him that much. I thought he was kind of weird. Silk has grown on me. I love Garion. He's the main character. You can't not love the main character. I mean, come on. But really grown on me. First part of the book, we're just following them the whole way, and then these, like, it's technically 5 parts, but to me, you could split the book in 3 parts. There's those 3 traveling, and then there's everybody else, and then back to everybody together. The bit where it's not the 3 traveling, I love Aunt Pole. She's my other favorite character. You have Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole. I love them so much. I love them dearly. Very close to my heart. They're such amazing characters. I love Dernick still. I love Dernick. I'm glad that he finally got to be a main character. He finally got to have a role. I love that I'm very happy. I'm happy. It's one of those happily ever after endings, so I'm like, I'm happy. Albeit, it ended with some cringe. Happily ever after with cringe is what should be said there. So happy. I'm very happy. Now, just because I say it's a happily ever after ending doesn't imply it's happily ever after in, like, the typical fantasy sense. I'm just saying that it's, like, a not very, very, very downer ending, even if downer things happen. Definitely, yep, it took my characters, and it used my characters, and I love characters, so, yep. Love Dernick. And really most, like, 90% of the side characters have really grown on me. There was a bit where Sinedra was actually starting to get on my good side until the very end. But, you know, that's because she was being princessy, and princessy people are princessy people. Let's just be honest there. But, seriously, all the characters in this series, and the interaction between the characters really is what I love. So just sometimes that friction won't be there, but sometimes it's there and it's just very satisfying. Especially with the audiobooker. Just saying. Just saying. So, if I had to choose like the one strongest suit of this series, it's the characters and the interaction between the characters. It's so good. And it's weird how some not technically people also become characters throughout the story as well. I'm going to leave that kind of vague, but there's definitely more to character interactions than just having characters interacting. And it's so good. It's so good. I love Aunt Poland. I love Mr. Wolf. I have nothing else to say. I love them so much. They're so good. And Garion. But not nearly as much. I do technically have a few complaints on the series, and I'm going to try to hold off saying those for a little bit longer, so I'm trying to think of what other non-spoiler things I can say without really digging into my notes. I wrote something about the author. Hold on, 1 second. Oh, the prologue. The prologue was actually in the antagonist perspective. Very interesting. I've never technically read that before. I think. I don't know about Mistborn. Mistborn, I think, went into the antagonist perspective at some point, but I don't think it was a prologue. The prologue of this book just right in there. Antagonist perspective. It's very weird to see how they see the world, because, you know, villains usually see, like, the world in their right. Like, they think they are in the right doing what they're doing. So that's fascinating. And it was definitely a good way to start the book, because it echoed a lot of the things that you're concerned about happening right at the start, and they stick in your mind while you're reading the book. Do-do-do. Do-do-do. Some of my notes are freaking hilarious. Where did I write it? I wrote something about the author. A lot of exclamation marks. I wrote so many notes. Seriously, where did I write about the author? Oh, one of the things I noted was that, again, something that I brought up when I was reading Codex Alera is that the author in this book is still introducing new things, even though it's like the final book of the series. Like, they're introducing new races and new people and new types of magic and all of that, while it's leading towards like the final destiny conclusion of the whole thing. So that is, I love when authors do that. They don't just leave it there, they keep world building. Just keep on world building. Make everything. I want Lord of the Rings level stuff. And this author was trying to get to that. And there was definitely some things I never thought would show up in this series, i.e. a circle with a 5-pointed star in it. You don't pick up this series expecting to see that in it, but it did. And it made sense. Albeit unexpectedly. Very interesting. So, I wanted to bring that up, because that's kind of fascinating. Author is good at writing unique scenes. What's that mean? Oh, okay. Not unique. That was actually bad wording there. So, that scene, when I say unique, I mean that the author is good at doing research into making things that aren't like everyday things, like, sound relatable. So, explanation, in that scene, they are crossing reefs. Like, as the tide goes out, and then they're trying to cross the reef before the tide comes back in. Most people haven't had that experience. I have. I did a trip in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. It's called the West Coast Trail. You can Google it. It's a multi-day trip on a trail that goes along the southern part, I believe southern part, of Vancouver Island. And originally, well, you guys don't need to know the history behind it, but there's some cool history behind it, and I would look into it. But most of the time, you can choose to stay in the jungly part rather than go down to the beaches. But I think there's twice that you have to go down on the beaches, and you have to keep track of the tide chart as you're going, so you don't go down and have the tide come in and sweep you up, because that is bad. And you don't want to go into the ocean with all your gear, because you're wearing a lot of gear. So we had to do some of those tide crossings, and the first one really wasn't that bad. It was basically kind of like a beach, but rocky. The second one was bad. We went pretty much as the tide was going to start coming in, but it was a long stretch, so, like, it's very slippery and very rocky. I mean, very slippery. Like, you have to watch every single itty muscle when you place your feet. So, very slippery. I fell on my butt at least 5 times, but, there's that. But as the tide started coming in, it gets more slippery because the water is coming in. You can't see where your feet are going. And at the end, there's this, like, thing you have to climb up on, which is slippery. But you have to climb it with your hands. It was very dangerous because if you fell, you were going to fall into these rocks. Not advised. I do not advise doing that. You were not supposed to do that. We made it, barely. Literally, tide was coming in as my dad came up. Like, the actual part of the tide. So, that was a little bit scary experience, but, that's kind of a unique experience. Like, learning how to tread very slippery reefs as the tide's coming in. This author in this book has one of those scenes with horses, 3 horses and 3 people, and the way he describes it reminded me exactly of what that was like. And if, like, for someone who hasn't experienced that, it really gives a good image of what it is like. So I liked that the author was good at writing scenes like that and really having truth to them, because it definitely called back to that experience for me. So that was the thing I was going to comment on the author. I don't think I think everything else I wrote notes-wise. Well, one second. I'm sorry. I unplugged everything. Ow, my knuckle. I think that's the last note that isn't just plot. Interestingly enough, in the climax of the series, there was a lot of politics. I mean, like, a lot of politics. We're talking Codex Alera level politics. And that is really saying something. There's a lot of politics. Codex Alera. But we're jumping between all these perspectives we never saw before in the series, in this book. But it really worked out because it was showing how many levels of events were happening all at once. Like, there was a lot going on and everything was affecting other things. And so by jumping between all these perspectives, we were able to see how one thing affected another thing, affected another thing. Very fascinating. So I also really liked that. Trying new things, even though it's the last book of the series. You gotta do it sometimes. So I very much appreciate that. And I guess just one last thing is that this book also balanced the darkness with funny moments. As usual, it was just the funny moment journey, but this was the book where bad things are going to start happening. People were going to start dying. It just happens sometimes. And the author is really good at balancing, like, the darkness of war with those very tiny, funny details, like a chubby horse, for example. Like a very chubby horse. It's just the tiny things sometimes. So that also happened. And people did die. One of the things that I don't like in books is when people are too scared to kill their characters. Even if I'm scared that the characters are going to die, I want to be scared that the characters die. That makes me enjoy the book more in a very weird way. Don't question it. Everyone's telling me to read dark fantasy. I wonder why. So I'm glad that this author wasn't too scared at threatening with characters, though I do think he could have done it a little bit more. maybe a little bit more. But it also makes sense why, and so that's why I'm not going to be too picky on it. So I think that's my last non-spoiler thing to talk about. I've very much loved this series. It's not really, as a whole, especially as time passes after I finish it, gonna really compare to other things I've read. It is very different, and is definitely YA, albeit with some adult cringe. So, it's definitely different, and I can see why some people don't want to read it as adults, and I get it. But it really, I don't know, there's something just satisfying about the old storytelling, destiny-based children's tale. And I loved being able to experience that again, because I haven't done that in a long time. So this really calls back to like childhood stories. In fact, to an extent, I haven't talked about this book in a while, but to an extent, it reminds me of Journeyer. It is a journey, and I do love journey stories. That's why I like historical fiction. That's what this is. This is historical fiction. Just going on trips and learning new things and exploring the world. That's it just reaches inside of me. It's one of the things I love. So it is very satisfying to read a series that is a journey series for the most part, albeit with some kingdom trips and stuff. And looking back on it, I'm very glad I read this, and I'm very thankful to my aunt who recommended this series to me. At my family reunion, I was rambling about my own books that I read, and she just told me, read Belgariad, and I wrote it down, and I thought about not doing it. I'll be a little bit honest. I thought about not doing it because it was 5 books and then a sequel series. I was like, that's a lot. I went for it. I picked up the first book. Audiobook was the only thing available via my library, so I was like, okay, I guess we're doing audiobook. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. So, some bits may be slow. Some bits may be repetitive from previous books. Some bits may not make sense. It's not a very unique plot story, or the plot doesn't really carry the books. It's the characters, really. The characters and the character interactions is what makes these books so very fun. And also, in the first 3 books, the element of mystery, because you don't really know any of what's going on. You don't know about the prophecy. You don't know the significance of the main character or any of that. So the first 3 books, it's like the mystery elements were really catching me, because I was originally a mystery reader once upon a time, a long time ago. So, it starts off with that, and he still keys into that, especially in book 5. I'm not going to comment on book 4 in regards to the mystery aspects, but book 5, there were new parts of the prophecy being revealed in the last book as it was happening. So that is maybe its best plot element, in my opinion. But really, it's mainly the character interactions, just their sass and their way of speech and all the accents and stuff, how they all kind of make fun of each other for being different races or different, having different cultures and different backgrounds, but also seeing how all the different backgrounds work together, especially in this last book, when all the nations come together. It's very good. It's very good. So, character interactions are great. Still my favorite characters. I am liberally giving this book a 5-star rating, but I should comment, it again does not compare to other series. It's 5 stars for this series, is what I should say. And I know I'm very unreliable with star ratings, and that's why I hate giving star ratings. I haven't said that in a while, but it's true. I hate star ratings because it's hard to be consistent. It really is hard to be consistent with stars, because if I had to compare this book to Captain's Fury or Hero of Ages is probably the best example. It's hard. It's hard to compare this to Hero of Ages, because Hero of Ages is powerful, and I mean powerful. So, you know, it's really hard to do those things. It's kind of like a little bit, this is a callback, it's a little bit like Traitor's Blade, where, you know, I have my criticisms, but I kind of just, like, cover them up sometimes. Sometimes. With the series. So, I don't know, it's hard to give ratings. It really is, but I'm giving this one 5 stars just because it had me the whole book. It didn't have the slow bits, and I didn't put it down at all. I was ready to go. It had my attention the whole way. Even with all the Sinedra bits, I was still listening in, waiting for things to happen, all the new things being revealed, all these little subtleties. So many subtleties. And it is, God, I have the hiccups. It's very satisfying when everything comes together at the end. So, 5 stars. It was definitely fun. It also wasn't predictable. I thought it was going to be predictable. This is my last note, I promise, and then we'll go into spoilers. I thought the series was going to be predictable with the with them telling us the prophecy the whole entire way. But the end did not go down how I thought it would. So, also have to give kudos for doing that. I didn't predict what was going to happen at all. So, there we go. Alright. That's really my non-spoilers bit. Woohoo! This is your time to leave. Oh, I'm out of tea. Very sad. Alright. I have so many spoilers notes. I'm gonna skip half of them, I swear, because I do not have enough time to go through literally every part of the book. Oops. But I did talk about how the beginning started in Torak's perspective. I noted that he's selfish and blind, but his perspective makes sense to him. So I think that was very fascinating. And I did write, I swear if Aunt Paul becomes Torak's wife, I will be angry. I was gonna be angry. I didn't truly believe that it would happen because just, you know, the series is written in a way where it implies that that won't happen. That would require the main character losing. Thank you. We're just not gonna question that. It would require the main character losing, but you know what? I was still concerned. You never know with authors, man. There's times where they will do bad things to you. They are very mean to the reader sometimes. Butcher. Okay, yeah. It sometimes happens. So, I definitely got worried about that plot point a lot. I did not want Aunt Paul to get married to Torak because that sounds very That sounds very oof, is what I was gonna say. Not recommended. Very iffy. I've probably mixed oof with iffy and got very if. Please? Thank you. I actually like the thin chocolate better. This is too thick. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have done that. That's basically what I'll note, is that I was worried about Aunt Paul because she's my favorite character and I love her. Mr. Wolf probably comes out on top as #1 character, even though he's a sly old man. It's probably because he's a sly old man, I'll be honest. I have this... Oh, all 3 of the words that came to mind were not the right word to use there. I have this... something. That's all I was gonna say. No, I'm kidding. Sly characters, leonine characters. I have a list of, like, traits in people that I love and will, like, really get me attached to that character very fast, and Sly is, like, #1 on that list. If you have a sly, subtle character, makes like... Oh my god, why I can't words again. Makes all those like hinting remarks, but like not actually explaining the truth of something. Being sly, I love it. Ow, that really hurt. I don't know. Mr. Wolf is a sly old wolf, and that is all I need to say there, and that is part of why I freaking love him. And Aunt Pole just has sass about her, and I love sass. And Silk's like a spy, but he's also kind of sly, and he like jokes to himself a lot, and that's why I've grown on to Silk. There's just these collections of character traits, and a lot of the characters in the series really fit them. Dernick's just a heartwarming old man. Like he's just a good man. So I guess he actually doesn't match anything on that list. He's just very nice. He is prude. Maybe it's because he's a prude. Not as much as Relg, though. Relg is his own beast. We're just not gonna think about that. I did like Relg in this book. I forgot to mention that. Relg actually grew on me as well in this book. It's very interesting. Alright, moving on, sorry. I was just ranting about characters again. I love being back in the journey, I already said that. I love that Garion in this book really showed that he started developing his own morals and stuff, and he's like, this is wrong, even though Belgarath and Silk were like, it's just, you know, a cultural thing here. He's like, no, this is wrong. So I love seeing him develop his own opinions on things as he's growing up. Makes him a lot more human and less of a character and more of a person, if that makes sense. Mr. Wolf, like, interposing, though, and being like, sit down. Anytime Mr. Wolf speaks up, I'm just like, yes! And Silk. Anytime Silk is what I wrote here. Silk is such a Silk. Silk was just being Silk. Just, you know, your everyday bounty posters with Silk on him. It happens all the time. I love it. He's just such... He's weirdly a static character. Silk is like a static character, but he's round at the same time. He's both at the same time. He is definitely the same person at the end as the start. Like, he hasn't changed with his outer personality, but throughout it, the round part is that you see what happens when his outer personality gets stripped away. That mostly happened in book 4, when he was upset and when he had to deal with, I think, meeting with his mom and stuff like that. That definitely chipped at him, but otherwise he's pretty much static throughout, and it really works. Weirdly enough, it works. I love that Mr. Wolf called in some wolves. I remember back in book 1, Garion asking Mr. Wolf, is it okay if I call you Mr. Wolf? And Mr. Wolf like chuckling to himself and being like, it's a very fitting name. I wonder why. I don't know, it's one of those, like, scenes that really called back to... Sorry. It's one of those scenes that really called back to the old books and actually made me want to reread them. And it was that time that I wish I had the physical copies, because it's so much easier to go back and reread physical copies than to reread an audiobook. So, really a shame. I really wish the chapters were actually labeled correctly, but on mine they're not. It's very a shame. Very much a shame. Oh well. But that was one of those scenes that really wanted to make me go back and reread the old books. And that happens quite a few times in this book. So, very good. There were sometimes... Oops, sorry. There were sometimes I was very confused with why the plot went the way it went. This is one of the criticisms I was implying earlier. I don't know why they just let themselves be taken by the... Oh, it wasn't Murgo. There were these army recruiters for the bad guys, or for one of the bad guys who ended up switching in the end, but, you know, there were these army recruiters, and Silk and Garion just let themselves be taken. And I don't know why. Like, I don't see the reason why they would just let themselves be taken and march down the woods for a bit and all that. and then being taken by Yarbleck, and Yarbleck taking them all the way to the king. Like, not once did they... Like, Garion was like, should we play an escape? And Silk was like, no, we'll probably just make it worse. He might not be wrong there. But also, you guys were on a time limit the entire book. So I'm a little confused why they just let that happen, and why Mr. Wolf just followed along and didn't do anything for the whole time until the very end, and all Mr. Wolf did at the very end was come in and say, I'm Belgarath, and then leave. That was very weird to me. So, it was very entertaining. It wasn't, like, boring or slow or anything like that. I just didn't understand why, plot-wise. Why was this happening? Maybe a little bit more explanation. So, that is maybe one of my criticisms. And I implied it earlier, that sometimes the plot isn't the book's strong suit. That applies to all of the books. But it works in the end, and they make their way, so it really works in the end. I wrote a very tiny comment about them catcalling the king. I think that's funny. That's one of those tiny little details that's funny. Why is any of this happening? I don't remember why I wrote that. Mr. Wolf was being Mr. Wolf. And I wrote a bunch of comments about loving him because I freaking love him. He's my favorite character. I love that he can just go undercover. Again, I like sneaky, sly characters. Spies are a favorite. So, he goes undercover, and that's always satisfying. And I also love later, this is jumping a bit, but later when they do disguises and all these things, and like they're trying to like blend in, also very satisfying. Very enjoyable. And then there's a scene where Silk is Silk, and I was very happy about Silk being Silk. I was just loving it at the beginning of the book because I had some great characters to read. So, I'm going to keep saying that same thing over and over again, and I'm sorry, but it's true. I love that Mr. Wolf could just walk in like, on the place. And I love when people call Garion Majesty. I don't know, it's just one of those, like, very little reminders, like, Majesty. It's such a good word. I don't know if I've mentioned it on this channel. I did at some point, but I don't remember if it's still up somewhere. I started writing a novella once upon a time, and in my novella, I did a variation of the word majesty. I did majestat, M-A-J, I don't even remember how I spelled it, E-S-T-A-T? Majestat? I don't know, but it's such a good word, but I wanted it to be unique because I was a kid. So all I'm saying here is that it's a great word, and I love just the use of the word majesty. And I also love later when all the kings refer to each other as majesty. It's like there's something fascinating in that, and like how kings all can acknowledge each other as higher, even though they're all equal. Does that make sense? I just like titles, not in like the actual definition of what they are. So like I don't care that people are higher than other people. I do not care for that. But there's something just about a title that says something about a person. So having Garion like working his way to becoming Majesty and having people respect him that way, as he's just like, please no, is very funny. That was probably one of the hardest things to understand that I've said so far. Oh well. One of my favorite quotes that I came across, it's an old trick, but sometimes old tricks are the best, which happened when Silk just did the casual old rope, chest level, riders going backward. Sometimes old tricks are the best. He's not wrong. So, very happy. I love Belden's random arrival out of nowhere. They're just looking up in the sky and there's a hawk and I'm like, is it Zadar? My first instinct was that it was Zadar, but no, Belden came down and he was like doing Belding things and he was taunting Mr. Wolf for how angry Aunt Pole was. Angry. And then Belden revealed what Aunt Pole was doing and Mr. Wolf got super angry. It was like, what the heck is going on? And just, again, character interactions are so good. So, A lot of talk about the prophecy. Some more things were revealed about the prophecy. So what I mentioned earlier about this book introducing new things, that's one of those moments. We finally really get an explanation of what a magician is, despite seeing them on and off the last few books. Makes a lot of sense. I love Mr. Wolf. I keep writing things. I love how casual he is about the disguises and stuff. Like, you could tell that Mr. Wolf has lived for years and years and years by how much he just doesn't care how morbid whatever he's doing is. Having Garyon as a young character really provides perspective on those things. Where, like, you can see, like, how he agrees or disagrees, like, what is morbid to the typical person versus the people who have been living this life for a long time. Silk and Belgarath. I commented that the book gets super gory. At one point, there is a very gory scene. It's not gory in its description, so it's not that bad at all. But in terms of ways to kill people, it's a pretty gory one. So, for a YA book, it goes that way, for sure. I also commented that Mr. Wolf is so OP, and I love that he's so fluent in the abilities of magic, in the magic system. He just covers so many aspects of it. That is what leads to my other complaint about this series, about this book actually specifically, is that Garyon really doesn't do anything. Like, in all the books, he's like slowly training he finds out that he's a sorcerer, and he's like slowly working with his power, and he's getting better and better. He's able to create things from himself in the last 2 books. And in this book, he really doesn't do anything. When a conflict arises on their journey, both Silk and Garyon look at Mr. Wolf and are like, you do something. Garyon doesn't try to do anything himself. He just has Mr. Wolf do it for him. Eventually, Garyon's like, I told Torak to shut up because I was tired of it. Which, that was a good one. And he took action there. But really, aside from the prophecy's end, I feel like Garyon didn't do sorcery that much. I think Garyon could have used his power a lot more. And I wanted to see him grow with his power. But he really didn't use it in the end, in my opinion. So, it's kind of fascinating to me that was done that way. I would like to see a version where, the version of Garyon where he's like a fluent sorcerer. Like, getting better than Mr. Wolf. Though I guess that's never going to happen now that the prophecy has happened. But, I don't know. I think that's fascinating. Zadar. I'm just going to say his name. That's it. Ooh. No. Here we go. Sorry. Already said that. Already said that. I thought the scene with Seti was very interesting. I didn't think we'd see Seti. Ow. If you don't remember who Seti is, he's the assistant to Salmisra. The Snake People Kingdom thing. I didn't think we'd see him, but he actually ended up having a significant role. And that really goes to the whole jumping between all these perspectives thing. Because as we're jumping all along, we can see how each little piece was all contributing. But even the pieces you didn't expect is what I was getting at. I love that all Draznians are like Silk. Like, all of them. Just a lot of, like, the different personalities and cultures and things that I've mentioned. I love how they're all distinct. And that in book 1, you could tell, Silk could tell you what race someone was based on their personality. By the end of this book, you can kind of do the same thing. You could tell that, like, some people just think one way, some people just think other ways. One of the best examples is it starts with an M. It starts with an M, but it's not Malorian, it's, it's whatever Mandaralan is. guilty. Damn it, it's not coming to me. The knights. All of them just want to go kill Marcos. So, you can tell it's just part of their personality. Or all the people who honor Balar, there's like something behind their personality there. And you can tell that a lot of them are like universal political opinions in that area. With some exceptions, but you can tell it's like a broad... This chocolate's melting onto me, and that's why I started eating it. There's some broad sweeps sometimes, was what I was going to say, sorry. We're just saying it down. There is, one of the kings is like very conservative, and you can tell that he doesn't like being the first person to experiment with something. And then later we see his subjects being the same way about things, and so what I was trying to bring up was the fact that you could tell how all these different nations vary with their opinions, and sometimes I have to learn to adapt and stuff like that. But I love how noticeable it is in individuals and in the nations and the link between them. It's getting late. It's 10:30. It's not too late, but still. Let's see. I was surprised at how well the army was doing. Usually army preparations don't go that well. It turned out that everything went to shit, so I was actually correct. But at the time I was like, wow, everything's actually going very well at this moment. Usually wars don't go well. And then the war fell apart, and I was like, ah, yes. That's more correct. So, in my mental image, I just want to say that I called the Garian flower scene. I was like, they're going to find those flowers, and there's going to be like this like reminiscing scene. And I was right. It happened. I already mentioned the chubby horse. I just want to say the chubby horse noble was one of those very funny tiny details. I noticed that "You are impossible" is one of like the key quotes of the series. It's been said a lot by people, along with "You're disgusting." "You're disgusting" and "You are impossible" are two of the biggest like insult quotes. It's kind of weird, but it works. The general of the duchy. So he's like the main general of King Rambarun, I think. But as a duchy. He was a very interesting character. Like, his arrival was kind of out of nowhere, but he already had a link to Sinedra, so it made sense. But his interactions and the way he was like an uncle to Sinedra, it was just one of those like surprise out of nowhere characters that you kind of like pretty much off the bat. So I found him interesting. Already mentioned that. I already kind of mentioned this, but being more specific, Relic and Taiba really grew on me. They were actually being nice to each other in this book, and seeing their like relationship come together was like very fascinating. And I like that they're actually being nice now. I hated them earlier just because they were being a-holes to each other. Like, to put it bluntly, they were being jerks. And it really wasn't that entertaining when they were being jerks to each other. It didn't really make sense why. They had no reasoning or anything. And I know you could technically point a finger and say it's the prophecy was why. It was very weird. In this book, they both set that aside. Like, both of them were being idiots before. This book, they both set it aside, and they were actually being people. So, definitely a lot better, and I liked how that was changed in this book, compared to the previous books. The previous books, it was actually a little bit annoying, in my opinion. Ow. Oof. Okay. I love how time was actually overlapping. I noticed that the different timelines between the three characters and everybody else were actually a little staggered. Where one thing happened here, and then we relived the thing over here. So, it was interesting how the author did that, but it worked out very successfully. So, woohoo! I already mentioned that I love Dernick, and I love that his role came in. His first role was actually helping the armies, and he was able to be like an engineer for a bit. And I loved him being smart and being able to contribute and actually not being a background character doing nothing other than making a fire. So I was glad about that. Good search. What's that mean? Maybe it's supposed to say scene. I don't know what that's supposed to say. I was using voice type for part of it, and voice type does not hear me well. I mentioned something about Aunt Paul knowing about Torak's version of the prophecy and like having this emotional scene with it. Very good. How inconvenient that I'm not dying. I thought that was a very funny quote that happened when Adana? Oh no, that's not it. Adara. There we are. It's when Adara like confesses her love to Hatar. Hatar? It's Hatar. And she's like, damn it. I was supposed to die. Very weird. I expected her to die. I thought it would have been very good if she died. She ended up living, but it made for that funny scene, so I'm letting it go. Beldig's revealing stuff. Beldig? That's not his name. Is that his name? Belden. Not Beldig. I don't know why I wrote Beldig. I think it's Belden. Belden was revealing more stuff. And I like the more factors of the prophecy that get revealed. And also when Mr. Wolf is like, that's what that part of the prophecy meant. As they're like realizing it as they go. Very entertaining. I already mentioned this, but the fact that the whole war went to shite. Accurate. I like when that happens in series because I mean, not that I would have experience with war in real life, but in my opinion, that's really how a lot of it goes. It's nearly impossible to plan for literally every possibility because each side is constantly trying to find roundabout ways to do things. So, you set up a plan and it doesn't go to plan. It's usually what happens in life. I mentioned that's very intense. There is this one scene where the author goes out of his way to kill, like, a surf flute player, like, just the most beautiful music in the world. And I feel like there's, like, a theme, like, a strong statement behind that scene. I'm not going to dig too much into it, but it definitely has this, like, theme on perspective influencing the world, in a way. There's definitely a better way to word that. If you've read the book and you know what scene I'm talking about with the flute player, and you know what that was supposed to represent, then feel free to comment. I recently opened comments on most of my videos, just because I can. So, if you want to. Let's see. I was surprised about Zadar. When we actually finally met Zadar face to face, he actually was kind of a decent person, and I was actually surprised that he was kind of mostly there, and he explained himself, and it turned out that he's being controlled by Torak. Very interesting. I didn't think Zadar would be there. I was kind of scared that Zadar was going to be like a very bad man. But he wasn't. It was kind of interesting. Bel Zadar. There's a comment that Darnik's going to be like the most important part of the entire thing, and I was like, what? What? He ended up being a pretty big part, let's be honest. He kind of started it, so very interesting. We didn't actually get to see what happened in the room. Where it happens, the room. I'm sorry. I've had musicals in my head recently. We didn't actually get to see what happened in the room that made Durnik like start to like lash out. Like, I guess maybe is what Belzadar was saying, but I don't know. I want to see the room. So, I think that's interesting that we didn't get to see the room. But it works, for sure. It definitely works. It has this, like, mystery about it. I do kind of want to know, though. I love that the prophecy, like, as a person, the prophecy that talks to people in their heads, acts like any other character. Like, the character interactions that I love between people that are, like, sly or sassy or they're like joking together, conspiring. The prophecy does the same thing. The prophecy jokes like a person. It isn't like just some super serious thing. isn't like a soldier personality. No, the prophecy like jokes and has sly remarks and stuff. So I just love that detail. I love that Garion was growing up and Wolf was enraged at him. This is the scene I was talking about where Garion actually like gets annoyed at Torak and just flat out wakes him up. Mr. Wolf got very upset in that scene, but Silk was just like, he's Aelorn, alright? Like, shrug. Silk is Silk. It's just your most typical thing. Again, character interactions. Mr. Wolf was very upset, though. I said that. I love the end, where... Oh, I love the scene at the end where the gods are, like... It's mainly, I almost said Aldar. It's not Aldar. Hold on. Ooh. I'm trying to remember the names of the gods, because it's the one... It's the boss, the master of Belgarath and Polgara. Come on. Aldor. There we are. I'm getting close every time, but I'm, like, not quite there. Aldor. It's mainly Aldor, but it's most of the gods. Mainly Aldor is, like, really pulling Aunt Pole's chain and, like, trying to get her to admit things. And, like, finally Aunt Pole is like, because I love him. And God Aldor is just like, oh, was that so hard to say? Again, the gods are, like, everyday people. They, like, have sly remarks and stuff. They're not just, like, super serious, like, stoic people. And I like that. He did it multiple times, too, though. He was like, and what would this man's purpose be in his life? And Aunt Paul is like, so I can marry him. And he's like, oh, was that also too hard to say? It's very funny. It's a very good scene. And, you know, that's in the scene where you're like, yes, Darnik, the man of two lives. He's gonna get revived. I was so excited about that. And they got married. I just want to say, I'm very happy that those two got married. I couldn't care less about Sinedra and Garion's marriage, but Dernick and Aunt Paul, yes! That was the marriage I was waiting for. I do think it's a little bit cliche how many marriages happened at the end of the book. It was like 4 or 5. It was a lot. So maybe that was a bit much. Very cliche. But, you know, happily ever after. Wolf using Taiba as an excuse was a little bit funny. And Silk being like, Relic has a problem. And then, Mr. Wolf having to explain what Relic's problem was. That one's kind of funny. But really, I don't think Relic would have had an issue in the end, regardless of Old talking to him or not. And I wanted to say one last time that I love Mr. Wolf. And also, I love the scene where Mr. Wolf's wife, I don't actually know her name, or would-be wife, you know, whoever, the wolf he had kids with, to put it very bluntly, the wolf he had kids with showed up, even though she's technically supposed to be dead, and he, like, was, like, ignoring her, because he doesn't want to acknowledge that she's technically alive, even though she's dead. And he was looking away, and Aunt Pole was like, it's my marriage, look at my mother. And he turned and, like, saw her. I'm glad that he was able to accept that she's not, like, entirely gone from his life. Again, kind of lovey-dovey, but Mr. Wolf deserves it, he's Mr. Wolf! Albeit, preferably without the cringy remarks that happen at the end of the book. The very last scene is very cringy. It is very on the nose with its YA-ness. And it was not necessary at all. I think it was just supposed to be funny. It's kind of a little bit creepy, though, because it's with an old man, and to me, that's weird. I just want to say that. That's maybe the one weird thing about Mr. Wolf, is that last scene. I'm maybe a little bit hysterical about it, but, you know. I don't know what people are supposed to, like, what people expect from me reacting to that scene. Like, I don't know what the author was going for there, other than, this will be funny. I want to see people react to this. I don't know what else that would be. Such a weird way to end the book, but we're going with it, I guess. I just kind of went through the entire book in one go. I definitely didn't cover every scene. We didn't talk about the nude woman dancing, or a bunch of those tiny things, but that's most of the comments I have, spoiler-wise. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but one last time, it isn't really a plot series, and it really does call my childhood, but I just love the characters. And sometimes that's all you need. Just something to listen to in the background while you're doing some chores that maybe has some of that good banter, some of those, like, very sly remarks. Occasionally requires you to pay a little bit of attention for some prophecy plot. But really, other than the prophecy plot, you can just have this in the background. It doesn't, like, demand too much attention or emotions. It doesn't really... I don't know what the word I want to say here is. It's not effort, but, like, it's not too deep. It's not too... It doesn't drain you to read it, if that makes sense. So, my best example, regardless of whether or not you've read it, Dresden Files to me drains me to read because it's so emotional. Like, they're very small books for the most part, but the main character just gets beaten up over and over and over again. He's dealing with all these emotions, and the people around him are dealing with all these emotions, and he has all these super serious tasks and stuff. And it's filled with jokes, and it's very funny. It's very modern, because it's urban fantasy, but sometimes it's very draining to read because there's so much going on, and you really have to pay attention in those books. The Belgariad, you do not need to have, like, your entire mind focused on it. It doesn't really soak up all of your energy reading it. In fact, it doesn't really soak up any energy at all. You can just go with it, right in the background, do whatever you usually do, and it's kind of like nonfiction in a way. Nonfiction is one of those genres that I can just have in the background and, like, not be digging too far into it. So, I really like that about this series. And it definitely, despite being in the background most of the time, I still remember a lot of it. Definitely a lot of favorite moments. Again, sometimes it was slower, but honestly, in the end, this is a series I would reread. Especially now that you know what the prophecy turns out to be. It's very interesting to go back and see all the little subtle hints in the earlier books about the prophecy. Definitely the first 3 books. I think that would be fun to reread. So, that's really what I'm going to end it with there regarding the series, is that it's kind of worth the time if you just need a book that you can just not pay too much attention to. If you recently read a really, really deep, harsh book and you need something lighthearted, Belgariad is a series to choose. Yay! Woohoo! And it has a happily ever after, just in case you've been reading too many books with very dark endings. Not this year, but last year I read a lot of books with very dark endings, so it's very nice to read something happy for once. Very happy. It was so good! It was so good! It was good. It was good. So, I'm happy. I'm in a rereading mood, which is a problem, but we're just gonna pretend like that's not a thing. With completing this book, this is the end of the spoiler section. With completing this book, that was officially me reaching my 2021 reading goal. 25 books. I've completed 25 books. I was actually hoping to do a little bit better, but summer did not go well. I did not read that many books in the summer. And in the spring, I was reading some not too attention-grabbing books. It took me way too long to finish Guernsey. I wonder why. Guernsey's not the typical genre I would ever read in my life. I'll read books that have elements of that. Belgariad is an example of a book that has elements of romance without actual romance in it. Guernsey went very slow for me. That is all I have to say about Guernsey. So definitely could have done better in the spring. The spring I did read all of Codex Alera, so there is that. The summer, when I literally had no school, I just didn't read. So I definitely kind of failed there. But I reached my goal. 7 days, technically 6 days before Christmas. We're taking it. It's next. Because I need to finish Powder Mage. It is next. I probably won't finish this over break. If I do, then that would be pretty amazing. I'm a little bit excited to get back to physical books. I'm not saying that audiobooks are bad, but there's just something satisfying about holding a book in your hand sometimes. So I am excited about that. How many chapters is this? I'm very carefully trying to not read. Okay, I didn't want to see the epilogue. I want to see the chapter before the epilogue, please. Thanks. This is a very long chapter, my goodness. 43 chapters. Okay. Whoops. That is next. Book 2 of Powder Mage. Hoping to read Book 3. Speaking of, there's one thing about Belgariad and Powder Mage. Both of them have sequel series. I actually own the prequel series to Powder Mage, but I do not own any of The Mandalorian, which is the sequel series of Belgariad. I don't plan to read it at the moment. It's possible I will read it one day, but right now I do not plan to get into The Mandalorian. The one person I have met that has read The Mandalorian other than my aunt, I haven't asked her actually, told me that it's a lot of a repeat of this series, which is kind of what I guess it would be. I'm sure it's fun and satisfying, but I'm gonna put it on the back burner until a time where that's what I'm craving. For now, I'm gonna do Powder Mage. I'm probably not gonna read the prequel trilogy of Powder Mage right after I finish Powder Mage, because I have a lot of other things to read, but I will definitely one day. Honestly, it's that series that has my favorite cover in the world, so I feel like I have to read it. I can't like a cover and not read the book, right? So there is that. If I do finish Powder Mage before break is over, or Book 2 of the Powder Mage, I will be returning to Journeyer. I know I haven't mentioned Journeyer in a long time, but the next 2 chapters are short in Journeyer, so I do want to get to them. And after finish Belgariad, I am in a journey story mood, because it reminds me of just how satisfying journeys are in series. So, I don't know. I'm one of those weird people that loves journey series. I know some people hate Robin Hobb fics because they're like, fics? Did I just say fics? Robin Hobb books because they're like hyper journey based, but I don't see why that's a bad thing. So, maybe I'll read Robin Hobb. They're very tiny books. They're right there. I have them. Anyway, that's really all I had to say. I don't have any new books. It's only been like 2 days since the last time I talked. But I might be getting Gideon the Ninth. I think I said that already, but I might get Gideon the Ninth. I don't really have anything else. Yay! I recommend the series. Bye-bye.